Hi, this is Mr. Milton. Today we're going to be talking about foreign affairs in the early United States. Now, before we do this, you've already looked at the United States map and you've already indicated where there are going to be some issues. You've already looked at the northwest area and you've looked at the southern border. Keep that in mind as we move forward, although you'll find that the first place we're going to stop is France again, mostly because we are talking about foreign affairs and we are going to be looking at the Democratic Republican and the Federalist view of things. Now, there are a couple of terms that we're not going to get to all these today, but I just kind of want you to have a working understanding of. These terms actually apply throughout the course, and they are neutrality, sectionalism, and nullification. What I would like you to do is write a sentence using each of these three terms. And you can go ahead and pause me, and feel free to pause me at any time if you need. I am just a recording. Nice job. So, what was going on in the world, and this is a bit of a review question, what was going on in the world to make George Washington declare neutrality? This is another place where you can pause. Excellent, the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution was actually a pretty violent revolution. While it started with some really great ideas, liberty, equality, and fraternity, eventually it turned into a very bloody time. They beheaded the king, they beheaded the queen, they beheaded many of the elites. They beheaded their own. It was extremely riotous. And while people in the beginning might have been for it, eventually they started to sour on the French Revolution. Now, we had actually signed a treaty with British, the Treaty of Perpetual Alliance, in which we said that if they ever got into war with Britain, we would totally have their back. So in the Jacobins, who is a radical party that takes over the government, when they declare war on the British, what should our role be? Do we follow through in that treaty, or do we stick with our really good trading partner, Britain? Washington, of course, as you remember, made a different decision altogether. Yes, Jefferson said we need to honor that treaty. Hamilton said no, back the British. Washington picked neutrality. How exciting! Now, not everyone was happy with this neutrality. Now, Hamilton did begin writing a series of essays under the name Pacifist, explaining why this was the best way forward. But Jefferson and Madison, they started writing, criticizing the Federalists and Hamilton in particular. We actually find that this is one of those pivotal moments in U.S. history in which the second party, which is the Democratic Republicans, really pick up steam. And you'll find that this group is actually pretty unified, and they're going to come pretty solidly against most of Hamilton's calls. Now, as far as Jefferson in France, he's actually going to have a little bit of an issue. So there's this guy, his name is Edmond Genet. He's the French ambassador. Now, he's actually called Citizen Genet. I'm pretty sure your textbook calls him Citizen Genet. That has to do with the French Revolution. They got rid of old titles of nobility. So people were no longer marquises or dukes or Mr. even. Everyone was citizen. So I would be Citizen Milton, just like you would be Citizen, fill in your last name. So when Citizen Genet came to America, instead of presenting himself to George Washington as he was supposed to do, if you're an ambassador, that's the first thing you do. You bring your credentials to the administration and they approve of you. He did not do that. Instead, he began recruiting Americans to fight against the British. Now, we just declared neutrality. So if all of a sudden we are sending people to fight the British under the French flag, that's a bit of an issue. Washington eventually met with Genet, telling him to knock it off. So did Jefferson. But Genet kept doing this. In fact, he said some pretty mean things about George Washington. But regardless, this ends up looking very bad for Jefferson in particular, because again, Jefferson is pretty much seen as someone who's allied with the French. So people started associating with Jefferson with the French Revolution, calling him a radical, and it was becoming a bit of an issue. Eventually, it was this issue and a series of others. Remember, his relationship with Hamilton was pretty much shot. That Jefferson actually resigned from the cabinet in totality. So Jefferson's gone. He'll be back, don't worry. As for Citizen Genet, there's another change in government because the French Revolution's crazy, and Citizen Genet cannot really go back to a country because they've changed governments. He ends up marrying someone in New York and lives on the Hudson River for the rest of his life. So that's the rest of Citizen Genet. Now, there are two treaties that we're going to be talking about. The first one is the treaty about the Mississippi. Now, as you can see, the Mississippi is kind of a border of many of the United States territories. However, we do not have access to this river. The river lets up around here in New Orleans. This is Spanish territory. Now, the issue is if you're living over here in Virginia or anywhere past the Appalachian Mountains, the quickest way for you to get goods is to go through the Mississippi and go around because there are no roads. So we really need access to the Mississippi River. We lost it during the Articles of Confederation, if you remember. The other issue that we have is over here. This is the Northwest Territory. The British actually, when they left after the American Revolution, they left some of their forts there with active soldiers. So there's lots of British soldiers, British outposts over here. Just so you can see, so you realize up here is Canada, where Britain's in control of. So it seems like almost like they're trying to stick around there to kind of see what happens with this territory. So these are two issues that are going to get worked out in Washington administration. One of them is going to go very good. One of them, well, it will pretty much be the end of John Adams, oddly. As far as the Pinckney Treaty, the United States, again, wanted to secure shipping rights down the Mississippi. And they also wanted to ensure that its land over here, past the Appalachians, were viable. And you couldn't do that unless you had access to the Mississippi River. Now, Spain actually supported French during the French Revolution. Spain feared that the United States and Britain might team up against Spain to get rid of all of this Spanish land. They did not want that to happen. So they actually made a deal with the Americans pretty quickly. They decided that, all lands east of the Mississippi is now the United States. So we just grew in territory. They recognized the 31st parallel right here as the official border between the United States and Spain. And the United States could use the port of New Orleans. So we got everything we wanted. We were able to travel down the Mississippi. We finally solidified this border, and we got this territory. So this is actually a pretty big win in 1795. Now, as for the other treaty, it's not going to go as well, mostly because of perception. The Jay Treaty. Oh my goodness. The Jay Treaty. The Jay Treaty is between the United States and British. So right off the bat, if you are a Democratic Republican, you might not like any treaty with Britain. It was negotiated by John Jay. That's why it's called the Jay Treaty. The goals of it is to get the British forts out of the United States. They were actually getting the Indians to attack American settlers, which is interesting, and we'll talk about why that might be. Also, to stop the British from impressing Americans into the Navy. Now, just so you're fully aware, we're not talking about the good impressing, where you impress someone by showing how intelligent you are or witty you are. This is like when you force someone to go into the Navy. That's the impressment that we're talking about. This is not an impressment that we want our Americans to go into. We also want to settle the boundary of Canada. Again, we have kind of squishy boundaries. We want to solidify them. This treaty will actually last 10 years, and it's going to be one of the hottest button issues in the 1800 election because people really do hate it. This image right here is the Northwest Territory, and as you can see, they have all of these forts all the way over here. Now, answer the two questions in the Geography Skill Builder. What is one common feature of the locations of most of these forts, British forts on the map? And why would this feature be of great importance to an army? So go ahead and answer that. Again, you can pause me. I'm okay with it. Nicely done. Now, there's other things going on with this. The Native Americans, who actually had much of the land in that territory, they were not at the Treaty of Paris, so they did not give their land to the U.S. They actually, with the British provoking them, they were actually started to attack any Americans who moved into that territory. Why? It seems for a couple of reasons. Britain probably wanted to create confusion, or they were just trying to solidify their hold on that territory. Again, it's a squishy border. And so Yeah, so they were telling the Indians to make sure they attack any American settlers, and so our settlers were not able to go there. Now, this actually eventually leads to a war, one of the first Indian Wars, and we'll see a number of them. And we have General Matt Anthony, and he leads federal troops to the Battle of Foreign Timbers, which you've read about. Fallen Timbers, Battle of Fallen Timbers. Even though he was outnumbered, he drew out the Shawnee, Ottawa, and Chippewa from hiding, and then he actually surrounded them, and that pretty much ended the battle. It was actually pretty quick. Now, because of that, the Native Americans signed a treaty giving up their territory in exchange for $20,000 of goods and $10,000 a year. So the issues with the Native Americans with when they're attacking our settlers is now over. When this news got to Britain, the Brits agreed to the treaty. Why? Go ahead and answer that. Now, this is going to lead us to the 1796 presidential election. The 1796 presidential election is now between two parties. We have John Adams for president and Thomas Pinckney for vice president. Remember that treaty? He totally ran for vice president. For the Democratic Republicans, we have Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. We'll talk more about him later. Now, the way that the Electoral College works originally, whoever got the most votes in the Electoral College, everyone had 2 votes. Whoever had the most votes in the Electoral College became president. Whoever got the second most votes in the Electoral College became vice president. Now, John Adams, of course, was Washington's vice president, and Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State, who's very popular with the Democratic Republicans. How it ends up working out is this. John Adams got 71 votes in the Electoral College. Thomas Jefferson, 68. Thomas Pinckney, 58. Aaron Burr, 30. What happened? The top 2 people became president and vice president. John Adams is president, the second president of the United States, and Thomas Jefferson is vice president. These are 2 people of different parties. 2 people who were actually good friends at one point, but who became kind of embittered later on. And you'll find out that their relationship is going to go through many, many issues. We have 2 people from different parties ruling, which actually creates a very interesting situation. You can probably tell that we no longer do this, or else could you imagine if we had President Obama and Mitt Romney as vice president? They stopped doing this actually after the 1800 election, which is even more exciting. So this is where we're going to stop right now. Tomorrow we'll talk more about John Adams' administration and leading into Thomas Jefferson's administration. All right, that's it. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon.